the meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to the June Borough Board meeting for Staten Island. First and foremost, if we could all get together and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Bob, you're up. Thank you. I pledge allegiance
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America
and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with
liberty and justice for all.
Good job.
You know, I think we have a politician in the making there, Chris. Thank you.
Yeah. She's all set. She's raring to go.
Great. Start them young. Well, welcome, everyone. Looks like, I believe we've got representatives from all the community boards and, all the council member offices. Anyone from CB3? Okay, we'll leave that as a question and look for them, hopefully, to join us. In lieu of getting our presentation started, I thought I'd hand it over to Angela, and we'll tee that off and then deal with the rest of our Staten Island Borough Board operational stuff afterwards. Okay? Angela, I'll make you the presenter, and the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much. I am Angela Blissio. I'm from the Department of City Planning. I am joined today by Chris Lee in our zoning division, by Angie Koo from the Staten Island office, and James Harris from our intergovernmental relations. And we're also joined by the MTA team, Moonstone Park, who's in their transit-oriented development group, and Howard Levine and Luke DePalma, who are also in their governmental relations. So I'm going to share my screen, and then I'll pass it right over to Howie to begin our presentation. So we'll see if I can make this work.
Great. Thank you, Angela.
Thanks. Let me see if I can make it full screen. Is that? Would that work?
That's great.
That's fine. Yeah.
And then actually, I'm not sure how to unmute myself. This is the night. I'll just be very quiet. Great. Great. So then I'll pass it right over to Howie.
Howie, we can't hear you
Okay.
if you're talking. Oh, his audio is not working.
There we go.
Okay, I think I'll just take over for Howie until his audio picks up.
Thank you, Munson.
Sure. Hi, everyone. So thank you for your time this afternoon. We're here to present Elevate Transit Zoning for Accessibility, which is a joint proposal that was crafted in collaboration between the New York City Department of City Planning, MTA, and we've also were joined by the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. This proposal is a citywide zoning text amendment, which will enable the MTA to work more efficiently with private developers to help us get to system-wide accessibility more quickly. So there are two components to this proposal. The first component is a system-wide transit easement requirement. That is the focus of this presentation. The second component of zoning for accessibility is an expanded transit bonus, improvement bonus, that applies to high-density areas. So that is not currently applicable in Staten Island, so we will be focusing on the first component. We can go to the next slide. Our system is quite old. It was started, the New York City subway system was started over 100 years ago, and we have many old stations. Most were built decades ago, before 1950. So as you can imagine, making them accessible is quite challenging because they were not designed with accessibility in mind. But we're starting to make progress through our capital programs. Currently, about 28% of the New York City Transit subway and Staten Island Railroad stations are accessible. We have 5 stations within Staten Island that are currently accessible. And out of this proposal also applies to the commuter rail stations within New York City as well. Currently, 25 out of the 39 Long Island Railroad and Metro North stations within our city limits are accessible. So as you can see, we still have a ways to go in making our system fully accessible. Just also want to point out that there are many features to making a station fully accessible. But this particular proposal focuses on the hardest part of making a station accessible. It focuses on the what we call vertical accessibility, whether that includes an elevator or in some cases a ramp. You can go to the next slide. So by not having a fully accessible system, it impacts many, many New Yorkers. It impacts people with mobility disabilities. It impacts parents and guardians that are traveling with young children. It impacts our growing population of seniors in New York City. And it impacts people with temporary injuries. So what that means is that when you don't have a fully accessible system, when you don't have every station that's accessible, it means that those who require an accessible station, it adds many more minutes to their commute because they often have to backtrack or take a bus to an accessible station. So what could be a fairly straightforward trip often takes, in some cases, hours. Next slide. And this speaks to the other slide. So within Staten Island, of the 500,000 residents, we have 30,000 residents with an ambulatory disability. We have a significant young population. There are over 30,000 children under the age of 5. And we have a growing senior population. There are over 75,000 residents in Staten Island alone that are 65 years and older. And among the senior population in New York City, the number of seniors is growing at twice the rate of the population as a whole. So you can see the urgency for creating, for making all of our stations accessible. Next slide, please. So within our current capital program, which runs from 2020 to 2024, we're making a historic commitment to making 77 more stations accessible. We're dedicating over $5 billion to 77 stations. And when we complete the capital program, and that would mean that 43% of New York City transit stations will be accessible. And we believe that that will serve over 60% of our riders. And that will also meet a goal of the capital plan, which is that no subway rider will be more than 2 stations away from an accessible station. Within the current capital program, 3 stations in Staten Island will be made, 3 more stations will be made accessible. They're the Clifton, Huguenot, and New Dorp stations. Next slide. And just want to quickly talk about why it is so challenging to making our stations accessible. As I mentioned, our stations are old. And many of our stations, you have this condition in many of the Staten Island stations as well. You have narrow platforms. So where do you put the elevator? It's not easy. You have an elevator shaft that can be quite sizable. And if you have a narrow platform, that leaves very little room to navigate around the platform. So that's one example of why it's so challenging to making a station accessible. And then on top of that, within the station, you have very tight entrances, and you have very tight areas where you have the fare control area. That's inside the station. Then outside of the stations, we also require either a ramp in a few locations, but mostly elevators. Where do you put those elevators? It's not easy to locate an elevator. Outside of many stations in New York City, we have to deal with narrow sidewalks, whether it's for an at-grade station, a below-grade station, or an above-grade station. Many of our sidewalks are becoming increasingly congested, or in some places, there just is no room to put an elevator. And then what we don't see is the underground utilities. When we put an elevator in, we often have to relocate a mess of underground utilities that are beneath our streets and our sidewalks. And that is why some people ask, well, why is it taking so long to put an elevator? It's often due to the relocation of underground utilities. And so if we can get an easement in a building, then that would avoid the time and the cost of relocating the underground utilities when we put in these sidewalk elevators. I think at this point, I'm going to hand this presentation back to Angela at City Planning, who will describe zoning for accessibility in more detail.
Great. Thanks, Vincent. So that brings us to our zoning for accessibility proposal. This is a citywide zoning framework that the goal is to create just more opportunities system-wide to increase accessibility throughout the system. So today there are some zoning tools that are in place to help, alleviate some of the burdens and support the construction of transit improvements throughout the system. Zoning can be used to sort of coordinate and align new developments and station improvements. And so they're looking at places where investment is already being made, already occurring, to see if there are opportunities sort of for coordinating the developments that are already happening with the station improvements that might be needed. And so in addition to aligning these needs, these zoning provisions can sort of speed up the overall delivery of transit improvements by sort of making space in developments for future accessibility needs. So one such tool in zoning today are transit easement requirements. An easement is a small permanent space reserved in a building for the MTA to use in the future. Transit easements have traditionally been used to provide space for new station entrances and passageways and sort of other ancillary facilities that support subway lines, such as sort of emergency egress or ventilation structures. However, in zoning today, these provisions have very limited coverage. There are currently easement requirements only in sort of select places in the city along the 2nd Avenue for the 2nd Avenue subway, most recently in Inwood, in the special Inwood district. And also currently in zoning, there isn't sort of a consistent citywide framework for approaching the the construction of transit easements on development sites near transit stations. And so as a result of these limitations, there have been missed opportunities throughout the system to locate ADA access at stations. This illustration is one that is in Brooklyn, where there was new construction, adjacent to an elevated station, a sort of very complicated station, that if an easement had been able to be procured on this site, they could have, the MTA could have cited an elevator right adjacent to the station. So in order to address the limited applicability of current easements, ZFA is proposing a system-wide easement requirement. This would assist the MTA with identifying opportunities for locating future station access points and other station facilities. So as part of this requirement, all developments and enlargements on zoning lots of at least 5,000 square feet and within 50 feet of a mass transit station would be required to first consult with the MTA and the chair of the City Planning Commission regarding the need for a transit easement. They would file an application to determine whether an easement on a zoning lot is needed. And applicable zoning districts, which are in this little box in the bottom, are residence districts that support multifamily apartment buildings. These are all districts at or above R5 with a commercial overlay, or R5D districts. All medium and high density commercial districts, and all manufacturing districts. So this easement proposal actually has quite limited applicability in Staten Island because so many sites around stations do not fulfill both of these requirements of being in the appropriate residence district and being within 50 feet of a transit station. And so we have some slides later on in the presentation that will go through the three community boards of Staten Island and sort of talk about exactly which stations are applicable. But to sort of better illustrate what this easement process actually is, we put together this flow chart to sort of walk you through what we're talking about. So you have a development or an enlargement that's within 50 feet of a station envelope. The developer will file with the MTA and the chair of the City Planning Commission requesting a certification as to whether an easement is needed. And then the MTA and the City Planning Commission chair have 60 days to decide if an easement is needed. And if it doesn't, they will issue a letter certifying that no easement is required, and that is the end of the process. And we're anticipating that that is the most likely trajectory of, through this flow chart. So, while the process of obtaining a certification would be required for most sites that are within 50 feet of a transit station, it's really anticipated that the MTA will only ask for easements in very limited areas because they're looking for the sort of most optimal place for a future transit entrance. If the case, though, is that an easement is required, the MTA, in consultation with both the developer and the CPC chair, will determine, sort of the configuration, the easement type, and the dimensions and size of the easement. The developer will submit a site plan for approval and final certification by the MTA and the CPC chair. And then the MTA and the chair have 45 days to comment on that site plan and then grant a permit, which will allow for the excavation and the future development of that site. So in order to facilitate easement agreements in the future, we're proposing targeted relief from certain zoning limits that would be provided to sort of minimize the potential conflict of challenges for the construction on a site subject to its easement requirement. So there are 5 general categories of easement relief being proposed. The first are floor area and open space provisions. And these would ensure the accommodation that an easement does not reduce the development potential on a site. The proposal would provide a floor area exemption and lot area and lot coverage increases in certain districts. And where easements areas are located outside of buildings, they could be treated as permitted obstructions. The second group are height and setback modifications. The proposed zoning would allow height increases and additional street wall flexibility. Third, we're proposing parking relief, which would address potential limitations created by the easement on providing required parking spaces. So this would create parking relief in the form of deduction or parking waivers for small sites. Fourth, we're proposing use allowances, and these will be made available to support compatible uses around station entrances. The proposal would allow temporary uses within the easement volume until the space is needed for a new station entrance, and to allow commercial uses within 30 feet of an easement to promote compatible uses around the station entry and exit points. And finally, streetscape provisions would minimize the conflict between transit users entering and leaving the station entrances and sort of vehicular traffic coming off of the new development site. So the proposal would exempt easements from streetscape requirements and ensure that the curb cuts are not located within 30 feet of an easement to ensure distance between people using the entrance and traffic accessing the development site. So there are some sites that have, very unique conditions that might create a challenge for providing an easement. And so in order to accommodate those sites, we are allowing for additional flexibility. This would also help if there's a developer that wants to provide sort of complementary circulation space around an easement in the form of an open space. So to allow this additional flexibility, further modifications would be available. So depending on the amount of relief that's requested, these modifications would either be subject to an authorization that would allow a height increase of up to 25%, or through a special permit if more height relief is needed. And finally, while the easement requirement only applies to developments and enlargements on sites that are, have a lot area of 5,000 square feet in applicable zoning districts, easements could also be provided voluntarily on other sites. And this is a point that we think might actually come into play in Staten Island, because there are quite a lot of sites that do not fit our sort of two requirements, but where developers might be interested in voluntarily providing an easement. So for such sites that have the same applicable zoning districts, or that are multifamily dwelling units, or all high density commercial or manufacturing. So they're on small sites that are less than 5,000 square feet. The same set of relief that I outlined would be applicable to those required sites. They could apply to developments and enlargements that provide an easement. And on sites where an existing building that is being converted, targeted relief could also be provided to facilitate the provision of an easement within an existing building. So in other instances, instead of a transit easement, the transit agency might want additional sidewalk space or clear path around an existing or future station entrance. And so where a clear path is provided, we would also offer street wall flexibility to allow the street walls to be located beyond the permitted distance from the street line or street walls of the adjacent building. And so then this is just a timeline to show you where we are. We are currently bringing our proposal to all community boards in the city, all the borough boards, borough presidents. We will then have a CPC, a public hearing at the end of June. Then the CPC will vote and it will go to the city council. So we are currently in the public review process, which is why we are happy to be here today. And so that concludes the sort of formal part of our presentation. We also have a series of maps to go through specifically how this impacts Staten Island that I can pull up maybe in the question and answer session where they might be, it's helpful to go through questions that you might have. So thank you very much for letting us come and share our proposal with you. And I would love to open up to questions.
Angela, thank you. Can I reach out to you to get a PDF of the presentation?
Yes,
Perfect.
absolutely.
All right. Any questions, or what questions do you have for both CBs as well as council officers?
Maybe I'll stop sharing and I can jump back to it. If I can figure out how to do that.
Great, thank you. Council offices, community boards, any questions for our agency participants? Well, that was easy. It's like the Staples button. My understanding from Marie is that we will review with both our land use director as well as the borough president and see what sort of recommendation form they would like to take, and then connect with both the council offices as well as the community boards for a vote. So unless there are any further questions, I think we're good from a presentation point of view. Is everyone like on mute? No questions? I'm astonished with this group.
Brooke, I just want to go on the record saying my community board voted no for this proposal.
Very good, Nick. Thank you so much. I understand too, Bob had to drop off for a meeting, but we'll look to collect votes and the response for you shortly. All right?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'll be in touch, Angela, for the presentation. All right?
Absolutely.
Thank
Great.
you so much.
Thanks so much.
Okay, Borough Board folks, we'll look to continue with the rest of our operational requirements. I'd like to entertain a motion regarding the May minutes. If I could have a motion to accept.
I accept.
Sorry, was that Nick?
Yeah, that was.
There you are. Hi. Could I have a second,
Yeah,
please?
I'm running low.
Great. Thank you so much, Francine. Any correspondence, new or old business? I'll take that as a check. I'm not sure about what Marie, John, and the BP would like to do regarding the Borough Board recommendation. I'm not sure if it will be a vote that will reach out to you all to reschedule a quick meeting or do that online, but she said she would double check with them and let us know. Other than that, I think we are good for the summer then. We'll look to connect and get our Borough Board minutes back in order in September. Any questions, anything else from any of you?
We're going to be back in person in September.
You know, it would be nice to get a Nick hug, I gotta say. Hopefully,
Okay.
and stay well.
Okay.
With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Could I entertain a motion to say, let's do it?
I'll do it.
Nick and Francine, you are my two favorite folks today.
Yeah, very easy.
Have a great rest of your day. Stay well, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Okay,
You
Brooke,
too.
bye. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you, Brooke.
You
Say
bet.
hello to him.
I certainly will. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.